Cystic fibrosis can be a devastating diagnosis, but living with the disease can bring positivity and a new appreciation for each day. From the Bonnell Foundation in Detroit, Michigan, it's the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast. Nothing on the Bonnell Foundation Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast should be considered medical advice. Medical advice can only come from your CF physician. Here's your host, Laura Bonnell.
I was recently at the North American Cystic Fibrosis Conference in Nashville. I had a chance to talk to Dr. Ann Barbier. She is the Chief Medical Officer at Translate Bio. They're on the brink of some wonderful news for the CF community, an inhaled drug that could help 100% of the CF population. Dr. Barbier explains what Translate Bio does.
What Translate Bio is specializing in is producing messenger RNA therapies for diseases that can be addressed by the production of a protein. And messenger RNA is a new modality, a new way of treating some diseases. It falls right between gene therapy and protein therapies.
We talked about this, and it's very exciting what you're doing. So for someone who doesn't have like the Trikafta that just came out, this is a different hope, correct?
That is absolutely correct, because what we are doing is we're giving the body the instructions to produce the CFTR protein. Messenger RNA, as the name indicates, is the messenger between the DNA, the gene, and the protein that needs to be produced. So with this therapy, we anticipate that CFTR protein will be produced, and so that is totally independent of whatever mutation you might have. So this might work for everybody. And of course, right now, the most stringent unmet medical need is in those patients who might not be helped by Trikafta.
And where did you come up with the idea? I mean, great brains, we were talking about this. I could never, obviously I'm not a doctor, but it's just so wonderful to meet with you and see, how you're thinking, and that it's going to change the world of people with CF. So how did you start thinking maybe let's try this?
I think it really started with a consideration of the basic biology. We know that there's DNA, and people are now familiar with the concept of gene therapy. We know that the ultimate product of DNA via a complex process is protein, and people have produced proteins for therapies like antibodies and things like that. But what is sometimes overlooked is that there's a step in between, and it is that messenger RNA. And while this was known for a long time, there were so many technical difficulties in producing messenger RNA at sufficient quantity, sufficiently stable. And as the technology has caught up with the biology, we're now in a position where we can actually produce that messenger RNA. And so between the gene therapy, which is established, the protein that is established, we're now sort of filling in the blank in the middle.
And how will people take it? Because the Trikafta is a pill, and I'm not comparing it, I'm just trying to set the stage kind of that it is different than pill form.
Yeah. This is administered as a nebulized formulation. It is intended to work locally on the insides of the airways. That is where that pulmonary disease is really focused. So it will be a local treatment, nebulized.
And it will work for the lungs because it's totally geared and targeted to that area. Right?
Yes, it is intended as a local treatment for the pulmonary disease.
And for parents listening who maybe were just diagnosed today or they have a 10-year-old, what hope does this give to them? I know it's hard to say because you're in the early stages, but what are your thoughts as far as talking to parents?
I think that all parents of CF patients are very attuned to the idea that bringing research breakthroughs is a two-way street. The pharmaceutical companies need to come up with ideas and drugs. The patients can participate from trial design to participating in trials. And so I would like to answer that question by saying we are doing trials. There will be more trials coming. Keep an eye open for that. We will communicate that via many different routes, and consider whether you or your child might be suitable for participating in the clinical trials. I think that is the best way to move this program forward, and also, if the drug works for you, to be one of the first people to experience that benefit.
And how excited are you that you're watching this develop and that it could be a few years out?
Well, this is definitely delayed gratification. You have to be patient because you don't get the results very rapidly. And the more novel a therapy is, typically actually the more slowly it goes, because you have to be so very vigilant about safety. So you cannot cut corners, you can't rush. As for me, I see it happening step by step, but it's happening, it's coming, so I'm very excited actually.
And tell me the process, like where we are now, kind of what you've learned so far, and then where you're heading in the future.
We are now doing the phase 1-2 study, so it's the very first study in humans, and it's actually very gratifying to us that we were able to go straight into cystic fibrosis patients. We did not have to go into healthy volunteers, which saves some time. Right now we have data of the very first single dose studies, the very first step, which were very interesting and very, very informative. And we are in the meantime we have started to do multiple dose study again in adult cystic fibrosis patients, and depending on the results, we're anticipating that this will support further development. We will do further studies with more patients. I think we can start to look at younger patients, 12 and above. And then we are also starting to think about the true pediatric studies in younger patients.
And it is always, 12 and older, and you understand it better than I could possibly, but when you're talking 12 and younger, is it because they're still developing and you're not able to do the meds younger, or why is there, usually it starts with the 12 and older?
It's just based on a principle of safety that you try very novel drugs that are not very well known first in the most robust populations, which is adults. And once you have some data there and you kind of know what to expect, then you can move down into teenagers who are still pretty robust. And so you have to walk down in age. It is not considered a responsible way of doing this to go straight into babies, at least not for this type of disease. If this is a neonatal disease, of course, you have no other choice. But for cystic fibrosis, specifically, adults first, teenager, younger and younger.
And what are you hearing back from phase 1 and phase 2? And are you hearing from patients or parents?
Well, we hear that the patients are excited to participate, and we've heard a lot of positive feedback. Because all the data we have so far is a single dose study, people are really not talking yet about efficacy. I think that would be premature at this point. But we do hear excitement about a nebulized treatment, what could be used maybe once a week, albeit for a longer time, but one time slot per week, as opposed to yet another drug you have to nebulize twice a week. So that's the kind of feedback that we're receiving, that we're actively seeking out in our engagement with the patient advocates. And then, as you already mentioned, the people who are not eligible for Trikafta are particularly excited at the idea. Maybe there's something for us coming soon.
Yes, I'm sure. Everybody very much is. I mean, yes. And then, did you say it would help the 10%, or it might help? I mean, I know we're very far from knowing all of that, but...
Well, because we're actually making the body produce the CFTR protein, we anticipate this could be beneficial in everybody. And the 10% is where the highest unmet medical need is, so that is where we really want to start focusing in the earlier stages.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then can you talk about what it took to get it to phase 1 and 2? I mean, it's a lot of money, right? It's a lot of time, a lot of brains.
Yes. Well, one of the things that took a lot of time was just to figure out how to get that messenger RNA nebulized and into the lungs, because it has to be packaged with some other components to make it stable. And it's a bit of a work of trial and error, because some things don't nebulize very well. So that's the first, a very technical hurdle. How do you make this nebulized? And then the second part is what you do for all drugs is a lot of safety testing. Is this safe enough? Can we really feel comfortable taking that first step? So those were the two components that took most of the time to get us where we are today.
And why did you decide to get into this field with cystic fibrosis? I'm always curious.
Yeah. Well, me personally, I am always interested in diseases that are sometimes a little overlooked, rare diseases, underserved diseases. And I think with cystic fibrosis, there has been such an evolution from being a totally neglected disease to a very legitimate, high-intensity field of research. And the modulators have really changed the way people think about cystic fibrosis. But they're still the 10%. and there are still people with unmet medical need. And as patients successfully grow up and age, new aspects of the disease are becoming manifest to us. So it's just a fascinating disease. There is great progress made. We understand the disease better, but there is still so much more to do.
And what if somebody wants to find out more about Translate Bio? Do they just go to your website?
If you want to know more about Translate Bio, Translate Bio's website is the way to do it. If you're interested in participating, all clinical trials are, of course, put on clinicaltrials.gov. And we collaborate with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundations, with many other foundations as well. So there are many ways for people to get their information.
And what are your hopes for the future of CF? Do you have more even beyond what you're working on right now?
Well, my vision for cystic fibrosis in general is what I would like to see happen is that, 5-10 years from now, some professor of pneumology starts grumbling, I can't teach my young folks what CF really looks like because CF nowadays is not what it used to be. That the natural history study of the disease has really changed, just like it has for tuberculosis. Tuberculosis nowadays is not what it was in the 1930s. That's what my hope is for CF.
That is it's a great place to be, right? Where you can look and think. Maybe one of the nurses was talking at the plenary, right, about maybe you need something for an older population even than just the adult.
Yes.
So that is exciting.
Yes.
What else do you want people to know about Translate Bio or what you're working on right now?
I think the main 2 points. First is we are working on this, including for the 10%. The second part is be broad in your thinking. There are pills, there are injections, there's nebulizations twice a day, maybe nebulization once a week, which you're not used to doing. Maybe that is a new way of thinking about new drugs. And then maybe there's a third point, which is do participate in clinical trials if you have an opportunity. I think I'm preaching to the choir. The CF community is very well educated about this, but I had to say it.
Absolutely, and actually doing the nebulizer once a week would be amazing because they're doing it so often during the day. So if that came about, that would be great.
Yes.
That would be. Well, thank you so much for taking time to talk with us. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
This has been the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. For more information and to learn more about the Bonnell Foundation, check us out online at thebonnellfoundation.org. That's the BONNELL Foundation.org. Or follow us on social at the Bonnell Foundation.